Hello everybody, welcome to Alex's Story Time. What if the imaginary friend you ghosted never left the mirror, and now she wants to play with your unborn child? Welcome to Alex's Story Time, and I am Alex. Everyone, this story is called The Girl in the Mirror, and it is told in the first person, but this is not my story. Here is the story. When I was a child, I was always alone. My hometown was in a countryside, and there were no children my age nearby, although I had a younger brother. He was too young to play with me at the time. My parents and grandfather did not pay much attention to me, so I had no choice but to entertain myself. My home was an old rural bungalow with several rooms partitioned into small ones. The room in the southwest corner was used as a storage space, filled with old items and tools. One of my pastimes was to run into the storage room and to treat the things inside as toys. I can't remember exactly when I noticed the mirror. The mirror seemed very ancient, yet it showed no signs of rust or dirt, and it was quite beautiful. Sometimes, when I looked into the mirror, I would see a strange girl standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. It seemed that the girl existed only in a mirror. This was clearly an incredible thing, but I wasn't scared at all back then. She was a girl with long black hair and a pale face. Her gaze always passed over my reflection in a mirror and looked directly at my face with a faint smile. Soon after, we began to talk. She said her name was Xiao Shui. Gradually, we became familiar with each other, and I would often talk to her in front of the mirror in a storage room. Actually, my parents noticed that I often hid in a storage room to play, but they never investigated, so they had no idea about Xiao Shui's existence. One day, I mentioned to Xiao Shui that I felt lonely because no one played with me. She tilted her head and smiled at me, saying, "Why don't you come over here and play with me?" I asked, "How can I get to your side?" I really wanted a playmate. But Xiao Shui just shook her head in confusion and said, "I don't know either." She fell silent for a moment. Then she said softly, "Let me go and ask around." And then she ran off. I was curious about whom she was going to ask. But Xiao Shui was always very secretive about it. A few days later, she told me happily, "I know how you can come over here. Come and play with me." Although I was very happy, I told her that I needed to let my mother know first. But she made a troubled face and said, "You can't tell anyone. If you do, it will be ruined, and perhaps we won't be able to meet again." I was also very conflicted. It wasn't in my nature to run off without telling my parents. However, I didn't want to break my promise with Xiao Shui, so I just kept silent and said nothing. "Then, come and play with me tomorrow," she said happily. "Okay," I replied. She extended her little finger and said with a smile, "Let's make a promise." I also extended my little finger and touched hers through the mirror, as if I could really feel a bit of warmth. That night, I had my first sleepless night. I didn't tell my parents about Xiao Shui, but I tossed and turned in bed, thinking of many questions. How could I get into the mirror? What kind of place was it on the other side? Why couldn't she come over here to play with me? Would I be able to come back if I went there? Thinking about these questions, I felt deeply uneasy and a bit scared of Xiao Shui. The next day, I didn't dare to go see her. On the third and fourth days, I stayed far away from the storage room, which gradually became a kind of a taboo for me. After that, I never entered the storage room again. A few years later, I went to high school in the city and lived in a school dormitory, returning to my hometown rarely. After graduation, I continued to work in the city, and soon I got married and started my own family. By that time, I had completely forgotten about Xiao Shui. Shortly after getting married, my wife became pregnant and went back to her parents' home to recuperate. I was alone again for a while. On one hand, I found cleaning the house to be a hassle. On the other hand, I felt lonely at home, so whenever I had time, I would go back to my hometown. One day, after having dinner at my parents' house, they asked me to stay overnight. In the middle of the night, I got up to use the restroom. As I was washing my hands, I glanced up at the mirror casually. There was a partition between the corridor and the storage room, but the door of the partition was open. I was puzzled because I had glanced at it before going to the restroom, and the door should have been closed. I looked back, and sure enough, the door was tightly shut. But when I looked at the mirror again, the door in the mirror was open, and I could vaguely see the storage room behind it. The white door. All the hairs on my body stood up. There was some movement behind that door. Finally, I remembered Xiao Shui and thought something was wrong, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. Sure enough, the white wooden door opened. I couldn't help but look back. The door of the storeroom was still tightly closed, but in the mirror, the door was already half open. Behind the door, in a dark storage room, a white object appeared. An unprecedented fear enveloped me, but for some reason, I couldn't move or control my consciousness. I observed that white object carefully. It was that girl, I remembered fondly. When I woke up again, I was already wrapped in a quilt, and the morning had come. Was this a dream? Although it was the weekend and the next day, I didn't want to stay in my hometown anymore. After breakfast, I made an excuse and returned to my home in the city. I drove into the dim and grand garage, parked the car, and habitually glanced at the rear view mirror. Xiao Shui was right behind me. I shuddered and quickly turned my head to look at the backseat, but there was no one there. Looking at the rear view mirror again, she was sitting there, staring at me from the mirror, with her pale face and long hair, just as she was before, unchanged. I was too terrified to look away. Trembling as I stared at that familiar face, she smiled and said, "Hello there. Why didn't you come to find me that day? I've been waiting for you all this time." Xiao Shui was still the same as back then, smiling and speaking gently. I was speechless, and I could only look at her silently, feeling very uneasy. Seeing that I did not respond, she continued, "Then, come over here and play with me now." As she spoke, her hand reached over my shoulder in a mirror, stretching towards me. "Come and play with me. Come and play with me," she kept saying. I said, "No, I'm sorry, Xiao Shui. I can't go to your place. I can't." She was silent, but her hand kept moving closer to me. I clutched the steering wheel with my trembling hands and said in a voice barely audible to myself, I have a wife now, and my child is about to be born. I can't go. I hung my head, unable to speak, feeling both scared and guilty. At that moment, I could only tremble and was unable to react in any other way. When I gradually calmed down, I looked up at the rearview mirror again timidly. Xiao Shui was still there, but her hand had withdrawn. She still had a smile on her face and said, Oh, I see. You've grown up and can't play with me anymore. Her smile was somewhat so desolate and helpless. She smiled, the same innocent smile from my childhood memories. She had forgiven me. Xiao Shui, I wanted to apologize and comfort her a little more, but she interrupted me and said, Since that's the case, I'll play with that child then. Before I could understand what she meant, she disappeared. After that, she never appeared in front of me again. 2 days later, my wife had a miscarriage. Several years have passed now, and my wife and I still don't have any children. I'm still hesitating whether to tell my newly married younger brother about Xiao Shui. Okay, everybody, this is the end of the whole story. Please share what you think of the story and your stories. If you enjoy my work and would like to help me continue to bring these stories to you, please subscribe to my channel or like my page. Give a thumbs up to the stories you appreciate and share your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I'd love to read them. Share the stories with anyone who might find them enjoyable. And I need a co-editor, a native English speaker to make these stories better. Thank you, everybody. This is Alex's Story Time, and I am Alex. I got a lot of good stories to share with you. So, see you next one. Bye.